Well, hello and welcome all to our last closing session of the First Responders Summit for 2021. Really great to have everyone back and coming together to reflect on really what we've heard and what we've noticed over the last few days. And most importantly, and certainly something we've heard from a lot of those fabulous comments and emails and sharing that you have provided to us is, but what next? Where do we go from here? So I guess I need to preface by saying we don't have a magic wand. We wish we did, but we don't. But we're hoping to come up with some tangibles that you as an individual, as a leader or a middle manager or someone growing in their career or leading an organization or an organizational strategy can think, action and do to improve the well-being of those around you. So just before I get started, for those who don't know us, Wellbeing Australia is hosting this summit and we're thrilled to be leading it. We are a not-for-profit organisation that is totally focused on delivering to our members and the community broadly. Everything we do is for our members and designed by our members. So we are not funded by any government agency, any sponsorship from any other particular organisations that will direct what we are doing. So everything we do is independent in that way. The other thing that is unique to us is that our focus is on positive, proactive strategies of living a life through wellbeing and focusing on your wellbeing. So while we respect there's some amazing organizations working on depression and anxiety and suicide prevention and whatnot, our focus is really respecting life has ups and life has downs. How can we really position ourselves to be prepared or at least aware of what may help us when we have those downs by being conscious in those times when we're feeling better. So there's some key differences in terms of who Wellbeing Australia is. The other thing is we are a national organisation, so we've been thrilled to have people dial in from all around Australia and from overseas in being able to access this information and see what's happening. So the themes of our summit and what we'll be reflecting on today were all around living well. How can you live well and live that best life? And there's three components that we've really zoned into throughout the week that are connection, and that's connection with yourself. So connection with your values, your purpose, what is important to you within yourself, but also connection with those around you. Additionally, there's hope. So how can I be hopeful when I am in those moments of challenge to be able to respond to, but also respect there are better days ahead? How can I have hope for that next phase? And thirdly, community. So how do we connect on all different levels? How are we part of a community at work, in our personal world, and in our community world from a local sort of region perspective as well? So they're really the areas that we've been focusing on throughout the week. Now, before I move forward in terms of anything around reflections, I just wanted to share with you guys, there is a button on the bottom of your screen that has Q&A, and we are very, very keen to hear your thoughts and feedback on the summit as a whole, but also where you're at on your own reflection. For today's session, because there is a lot we want to make sure we share with you from a reflection point of view, we will not be having any Q&A. There will be questions that are being directed to our speakers and our guests. However, they are more strategic from those questions that have been shared throughout the week and help us move forward in terms of our planning. So we do want your feedback. You are welcome to provide it in the Q&A. You will also be given a survey, a very, very quick survey at the end where you can share those comments and thoughts as well. So moving on in terms of what we're talking about tonight. So tonight we're looking at reflecting on that higher level theme of what has been happening. To join me in that conversation, we have two fabulous speakers. We have Rosemary Hegnar, who joined us just a few days ago to share her perspectives and her own journey, and also Ken Moroney, who is joining us to reflect on how we can really look from our perspective, but also that organisational. So two senior leaders in their field, and I'm thrilled to have you guys joining us because I think you have such goals to be able to share for us individually, us as middle leaders and senior leaders, but also organisations in terms of where we go next. So just
Thank you.
Before I throw to you guys for some ideas and some thoughts, a little bit of context around what has been happening over the past week. So we had more than 600 people register for the summit as a whole. That is people registering for the whole week, so Monday to Friday sessions. There's also the option for participants to select individual sessions. So additionally, we've had about 250 to 320 people per session dialing in. The beauty of the format of how we've had this run is it's an on-demand program, which means that if people missed it or were working at the time, they've been able to dial in and watch it after. But also we've had a lot of fabulous people sharing that they've shared it on with their friends and family, their work colleagues and whatnot. So we do expect the numbers of views to increase dramatically. And that's sort of been our experience in prior summits in this area. The data that we've sort of collected has been the vast majority of people joining us are identifying as first responders in both paid and unpaid capacities. And they're from all around Australia. And as I said, a few from overseas as well, but in all services. So we've had a really beautiful, broad representation from all different agencies and services as much as areas. And this has informed us in terms of what themes we're seeing and what challenges we're hearing in the context of how that is working across agencies and across different regions. So that's a brilliant piece for us to be able to reflect on. The interesting thing for us was that we actually noticed a lot of people were identifying as both a first responder, but also having family members that are first responders. And that's quite a unique situation in terms of the complexity of managing well-being where you are facing consistent and continual trauma because it's coming from different perspectives. So from a Wellbeing Australia point of view, we thought that was quite unique, definitely to the first responder community, but highlighting a different area that maybe is not being addressed in our programs within organisations. So in reflecting on all sessions, there has been great attendance in all sessions. So we've had really good attendance live, but also dialing in after. The questions and comments have also shown us that people were engaged in terms of what they were wanting to hear and getting their questions answered. Our goal for each session has been setting a tone that is comfortable, that is warm, and that is conversational. And so that engagement with the speakers is an opportunity for everyone attending. And certainly the comments and questions we had coming through did demonstrate that people were feeling that, which was great. We know from our own reflection as a group, as a not-for-profit, that the sharing of personal stories is very, very powerful. And I'm sure that Rosemary and Ken will share with us in a moment that that is what has really resonated this week, is that honesty and the candor that has come through from a lot of our speakers. In terms of the end of the survey, the end of the sessions, I mentioned to you that we do conduct a survey, and that's for us to be able to gauge the value to those who have joined in. So the survey itself is very brief, and it asks whether the session was informative, whether it was thought-provoking, and most importantly, whether it motivates the person to do something more. So is there a call to action? Was there something they felt they could apply? So on average, we are looking on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being most successful. We're looking at a 4.3 to 4.9 average on those scales at this point in time, which we're just thrilled with. So thank you to everyone who's completed the surveys. As the sessions are now live, you can still access the survey to share your feedback. So we still encourage people to do that. On top of that, on top of the survey, we've been overwhelmed and absolutely inundated on social media, but also via email with comments and feedback and thoughts from people who have attended or who have wanted to share on more. So one comment I'd make is, yes, please share on with absolutely anyone you want. That is why this is online, and that is why we are doing this. So the ripple effect is really powerful in terms of continuing to share that through. So in terms of key themes, just to summarize for those who may not have seen all the sessions yet, and do encourage you to go back and do it. Key themes of those feedback from during sessions and from the feedback coming through on the survey, in addition to those emails, was that generally the first responder community are incredibly grateful for this summit, grateful for the speakers and the time they've given, but most importantly for the tone and for the approach that has been taken, that it has felt solution focused and supportive and helped them at their own personal level, which was certainly our goal. A lot of people have shared that seeing people at different levels of organisations and a lot of senior leaders speaking really honestly. So people like Georgina and Shane and Andrew and Carleen and yourself, Rosemary, sharing your stories and your journey has been incredibly powerful. And the words being honest and vulnerable and authentic certainly came through in a lot of those conversations. The other themes that came through, and it was sort of said really, really well by Mark Croswell in his presentation, is that crisis creates character. This is something we face and we experience. This is what builds us as much as challenges us. So the courage to have conversations when we are in crisis is really what people are trying to understand and unpack. And a lot of people were asking us how. So that's something that we will pick up again in a moment. The other thing that came through from a lot of different agencies and areas were there's some really good things happening. There's some great initiatives. There's some great resources and programs, but there's inconsistency with who knows about what and who has access to what, and even has an idea of where to start to get that support. So that came through from all of the sessions. And I know, Ken, you'll probably touch on this, but the other thing that came through was asking for help is not actually bad. My perception and my experience from the past is possibly it's bad and it's weakness and I should be tougher. But actually there was consistent feedback from everyone that no, this is what is needed and this is where we need to come to. Just in closing, in terms of the importance or the consistency around well-being and those themes that came through from everyone, was we do need to confront the stigma of mental health. We need to take this head on, as Shane had said in the opening, and we need to show and demonstrate and support that mental health matters, and we all need to do something about that. Second, we need to focus not only on awareness, because awareness is one piece of the puzzle, but we need to offer solutions. And Dion shared that really strongly in the PTSD session, that it becoming aware of suicides and things that are happening when people are struggling is not necessarily solving or helping people know what to do next. So we must share more solutions. We must work forward on that. I know Steve and Paul and a number of others also spoke to the fact that we need to work as a community. So starting to think differently about our community and maybe thinking cross-agency in different ways in terms of what that community looks like, rather than having a more siloed approach. And then finally, Rosemary, you hit on this one, as did Shane, that we actually need to create a culture, an organizational culture of not only acceptance, but engagement in these conversations. So that might lead us nicely to you, Rosemary. Would you be able to share your thoughts and reflections on the past week?
Thanks, Kathryn. First of all, I'll start by saying Shane sends his apologies. Unfortunately, he's in transit at this moment in time, and so has asked me to step in for him. This week has been a really valuable week on many different levels, but we've had great speakers and engaging discussions. But I think if I have some key points for me that have really come out, I guess when you come to a summit like this, you realistically never expect people to be quite as honest as what we've seen this week. The level of honesty from all of the speakers has been absolutely amazing, and it demonstrates that they've all have this massive level of courage. And I think that when you're talking to mental health and the stigma of mental health, we really do have to focus our attention on courage. And I, as an individual, have to have the courage to recognise when I'm not coping, but I, as a manager, also have to have the courage to have those conversations with my teams when they're not coping. And so it's really critical that the courage and honesty are the key components to be able to start those sorts of conversations. And I think the thing that's been missing in this space for a long, long time is the word acceptance. You know, we actually have to accept that mental health is an injury. You know, post-traumatic stress, exposure to first responders going out there, it's an exposure, it's an injury. And as a result of that, it's just the same as any other injury. You're going to need to go through a process to be able to get to healing. So if I sort of summed it up very briefly, it would be honesty, courage, acceptance, healing, and all of those things come together to actually enable some access and sort of movement forward. I think, you know, it is really just so difficult. And I think courage is the key. I talked about my own experiences, and we've heard from others through the forums the fear of saying that there's a problem, for the fear of being taken out, and some of the ways in which people have been managing agencies before and being removed from the jobs that they love. That's a personal affront to your core, to your core values, to your purpose, and that doesn't actually help in the healing. And so it's really important to work through how do we do this in a respectful and caring way. And I think that realistically comes to the whole crux of this. It does need a level of leadership that can actually have vision for the future and lead with care. And I think leading with care and recognising that our people are our strongest resource is the way of the future. So I'll leave it at that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because leading with care is what we do in our role. That's what's driven us to be first responders quite often, but we're not necessarily continuing it through. Would you think?
Yeah, look, I actually absolutely agree with that. I think that, when we interact with an individual on a one-on-one frontline basis, we give it our all. We're there to completely focused on you. And I've often said to my teams, and it's been a bit controversial. I'm not interested in the patients. I'm actually interested in the people who are dealing with the patients. It's more important to me to know that the people going to deliver the care are well connected, engaged, qualified, all of the wonderful things that we need to have to be able to deliver great care in the community. That's always been my focus. And it's my focus now in resilience. It's about the community. Yep. But I've got to make sure that the people who work for the community have those capabilities and are able to deliver all of the things that we need to be able to make it happen realistically. And I think, that caring piece doesn't actually naturally translate to management because, we talk about mental health having a stigma. Well, fundamentally, management paradigms, if I said to most of my staff that, are you okay? They'd go, yeah. But they can't see the difference that I, as a supervisor or a manager, actually would need to be asked the same question. So, my focus for a long time has actually been asking questions of are you okay to people above me as much as people below me. And I think that's where I come from with the leading with care.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that the research shows us, and we know the data supports that when we're looking at, if we look from we often look at outcomes and results and KPIs and whatnot, the biggest impact is that connection, engagement, and well-being of our staff. Yet we tend to put that secondary to that of those that we're actually working with. So great.
Absolutely. It's all about, when you run a business, it's about the business. And of course, it's very easy to get caught up in KPIs and financial statements and procedures and technical stuff. But without the people, you don't have a business. And so if you turn that pyramid on its head and say people are at the top, you actually achieve greater results.
Absolutely. Now, Ken, you've been sat there very patiently. Thank you so much. Can you please share with us what have been and I know you've had a crazy busy week, so we really appreciate you joining us and sharing from your perspective, but I know you were very excited and supportive about this summit from the start. So can you share your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn, and it's great to be able to join you and Rosemary and Paul and others. And it would be so easy for me to just simply say I endorse all the comments that have gone on this week and that Rosemary's provided this afternoon, and quietly switch off, because I do endorse each of those comments. But I'm reminded as I listen to you both of a man that I regarded as a great mentor and friend, John Avery, who was the Commissioner of Police some years ago. And often when he described particular situations, to get a real feel for those situations, he would say to me, you need to have touched the flame to understand the import of what it is you are doing. And I'd look at him in a very quizzical way and think, what in heaven's name does he mean? Touch the flame. I know if I touch a flame, it's going to burn. But what he was simply saying to me, to gain an appreciation and an understanding of any particular situation, whether that relates to you as an individual or to the organisation of which you are part, either as a chief executive or in middle management or down on the factory floor, so to speak. You really have to understand the situation. And on many occasions in my career, that remark often came home to me when I saw at first hand, whether it was an operational issue or some other issue required strong focus and attention. I needed to have touched the flame to have understood what it was with that which I was doing. That was brought home to me on a personal level late last year, and on a very quiet Sunday, sitting here in this very room that I'm in now, I sat down at my computer to do some work. I felt a bit of a twinge in my chest, and I thought, oh, breakfast has gone down sideways. I think it's stuck here in my chest. And within moments, I'd suffered a significant heart attack here at home. I went to hospital, and I was lying in the hospital, and the cardiac surgeon came and spoke to my wife, Elizabeth, and I, and he said, "You are in need of urgent surgery, but I will be frank and honest with you. The surgery that we're about to undertake is more commonly known in the medical circles as the widowmaker." So that immediately gained my attention, Elizabeth's attention, and that expression, "your life flashes before your eyes," is literally true. But what I realised after the surgery, not only was the skill of the surgeon, the anaesthetist and the nurses so important, but after about 10 days, and I thought, well, I'm fine to go home. I'll just sit and I'll recover, and I'll read a book, and I'll watch television. I'll go for an occasional walk, and that'll be the end of it. But on my discharge, the good surgeon said to me, "You now have to undergo for the next 6 weeks physical rehabilitation." And I thought, yes, I understand that. That will involve being at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital 3 mornings a week, and you'll do exercises building up your strength. Fine, thank you. But he said, you'll also undergo wellbeing classes, mental health wellbeing classes. And again, John Avery's comment about touching the flame came home. And I thought, I don't know that I really need mental health classes. You know, the surgeon has done his work. The physical rehab people are doing their good job. But how wrong I was. And I realised that your recovery from such a traumatic event or an operational circumstances, you can recover physically from the event. But what goes hand in hand is the mental health recovery. And again, I was reminded of that expression that, you know, others don't define us. We define ourselves. And by that simple acknowledgement of understanding, I have to undergo physical rehabilitation, but equally I have to undergo mental health rehabilitation. And it wasn't one or the other. It was a case of doing both, hand in hand. And so the recovery has been good. The cardiac surgeon tells me to slow down. I've had difficulty in doing that because we all like to feel involved. We all like to be doing things. I don't know that I could sit at home watching Days of Our Lives or the midday news every day. I think I'd go bonkers. But so I'm still working. Some would say at a pace that needs to slow down, but I enjoy working. But what's been important in my recovery, as I found in 42 years of being in the police force of this state, it's not only individual thoughts and actions that you take, but the support of the organisation for which you work, colleagues within the organisation, and that one, more often than not, forgotten group, family. So the support that you receive from your spouse, your children, family members, friends, colleagues, is just as important as organisational policy, organisational support, and that which comes from within. But at the end of the day, It is about self-confidence and reassurance. And those things can be challenging, I acknowledge that. But whether we seek solace through faith, or whether we seek it through a sporting activity, or whether we seek it in some form, the important thing I've found is, and I've learned from mentors and friends, is that old adage, what lies behind us and what lies in front of us is nothing compared to that which lies within us. And that which lies within us is very much about how we regain control and we keep in control. And we start to prepare, not only in terms of the physical recovery, if that's relevant to one's circumstances, but the mental health recovery as well. And I think if you're able to join one with the other, with family, with friends, with colleagues, with the organisation, then your individual recovery is all but assured.
Great reflections, Ken. And it's so true, isn't it? First of all, we're thrilled to see you looking and sounding and feeling well. That's the most important thing. But we do detach that physical. And quite often that's something we've heard over the week is, I focus on that physical thing, but I don't think of the mental, or I don't have time, or I don't want to see it. And so it's fascinating you've been able to go through that, which is really quite a proactive mental health program where they're seeing that there's a potential challenge and see that value.
And I think, Kathryn, that's particularly relevant for all people, but in an organisation, particularly of men, predominantly men, we have this macho thing that we can physically recover. And it's like that dripping water on the stone. Inevitably, occurrence after occurrence, operation after operation. And the higher up the organisation, there are other pressures which come from the media, from politics, from organisational deadlines. And each of these things weigh heavily upon you. And I don't think you realise it. And so the opportunity to take time out, and as you said before, not so much taking a week out, that'd be great. Not about having a day out, that'd be as great. But it's just that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes me time. But I think what's important is being able to put up your hand and saying, I need help. I need help. And there's nothing embarrassing about it. I often, when I speak at training days for police officers, I tell them, particularly the men in the room, it's okay to cry. It's okay to have a tear in your eye and to feel all of those human emotions that we do as human beings. And whether that applies to Rural Fire Service, the SES, ambulance, corrective services, any of those first responder groups, occasionally we can have a cry, and that's okay. It's manly. It's a manly thing to do. It's not unmanly. And then equally sharing those experiences with our loved ones, with our friends. I know when I reflect, as I often do, my eldest son is about to turn 50. And I recounted to him recently that when he was brought home from hospital, my late wife and I sat beside the cot and watched him so that we could be sure that his chest was moving up and down and that he was okay. And that, as new parents, that was a stressful thing in itself. He was fine physically. So we learn to cope. We learn to talk to each other. We learn to discuss these things and realise we're not crazy parents who do these things. There are other parents who do these things, because it's about the love and the feelings that you have for your family. And equally, it's about that love, a different form of love that you have for your colleagues in your organisation. And Rosemary is so right to simply say to your colleagues, whether he or she is the chief executive or the commissioner or whatever title they may enjoy, down to the most junior person in the organisation, whether they're a specialist or a generalist, those simple words, are you okay? Then having asked that, it's just, oh, well, I've asked, tick the box. but really engaging and providing reassurance, remembering it's what lies within us that is so important, and how you impart that to others.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think that that's something it's so true and so great to hear from you and the other leaders of the conference is we need to have that conversation, but not do it in that quick passing tick box, I can say I've asked, but in a genuine, authentic way to really make sure we're engaging with that person that we're worried about or that we think is there. And that's something that, sorry, Ken, it's something that did come through very strongly through the summit, was people saying, I do want to do that. I want to know how to start. It's how do I do it? So how do I start that conversation? How do I find that release? How do I seek support or confront things I think are injustice or make a change? So how do I create that change to make it a better place?
Kathryn, I'd like to sort of flag something here too. We keep talking about, are you okay? And I think it's really important to sort of call that one out because, you know, okay for me is different to okay to Ken, which is different to okay for you. And I know that other speakers have talked about there are 6 out of 10. That's great. That might be okay for them at the given point in time. And I think, you know, it's easy to dismiss if somebody says, yeah, I'm okay. And it's just about listening to the finer points, you know, the how do they say they're okay? If they say they're fine is always a bit of a worry, but hey, but it really does go to that point. We like to be able to put things in very clear, structured boxes, and there is you're okay or you're not okay, but it's not. It's a continuum. It's that ride. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. And I think that it's really important for us to recognise that okay is very different to everybody.
Absolutely. And using words doesn't create a conversation. So there's no script. It's looking for those subtleties, definitely, that we're really talking about.
Those subtleties, Kathryn, can occur in minutes, hours, days, months, but it is about awareness. I mean, they're part of the supervisory responsibilities of middle managers and managers and those in command positions, but they're just as important for the person who sits beside you in the ambulance or sits beside you in the police car or the fire truck or whatever the case may be. And as I said, that great group for whom I always acknowledge, the families, about how families acknowledge and how they can come. I would like to think a spouse could come to me and simply say, as I have experienced in the past, I think my husband or my wife or my partner is experiencing difficulty. And then in a non-incriminating way, simply saying, well, look, Mary or Bill, let's sit down and talk. And I understand the apprehensions that some may have about how might this impact on my career. But your career is not as important as your life and the well-being and care of your family.
So true, so true. So thinking of that moving forward in terms of actions, of the value of this summit is in what happens next. We've aimed to start a conversation, engage a conversation, hopefully help people to think differently about themselves or what they're surrounded by. I just want to pose a question to you guys, thinking at an individual or an association level, you can think of either. What does good look like? If we project forward 5 years, what will good look like for first responders' well-being? If we're focusing on what we can do, where we want to go, what would that be possible? Ken, do you want to kick us off?
I think in the most simplistic form, you know, if I break my arm or I break my leg and I have a plaster on my arm or on my leg, and we might make light of it and we might draw silly cartoons on it, you know, Foo was here and all of those things that we've done. Yet when somebody is suffering from a mental health program, you don't put a plaster around their head and we don't draw cartoons all over it. We tend, not by design, perhaps by accident, perhaps without thinking through, we tend to stigmatise those with mental health issues. We tend to stigmatise those who want to bring to notice mental health issues. not in 5 years' time, in 5 minutes' time, if we were able to destigmatise the whole issue of mental ill health, I think that will be a significant breakthrough. How do we do that? Through legislation, through organisational policy and practice and procedure, by simply understanding as much as we can about mental ill health and how it impacts on us as individuals, as organisations, as members of a family. I think if we're able to break down that stigma that exists about mental ill health, that it is a health issue impacting in such a significant way on people. And I see organisations, I see unions, professional associations arguing, literally arguing for better pay, better conditions. I understand that. In another life, I was the deputy president of the Police Association of New South Wales. I do understand the importance of industrial relations and all things that hang off that. But I think it's time now for governments, organisations, industrial organisations to place an equal emphasis on the importance of the health and the well-being of their people, physical health and mental health. And that's, to me, of even greater importance than having all of the right resources, the right equipment, the right uniform. Important as those things are, I don't doubt that and I don't challenge that. But we've got to reprioritise and rethink what it is that we want to argue, proposition for our people. And equally down on the factory floor level, and whilst it's important that people will always argue for better equipment, resources and pay and conditions, as I said, totally understood. But I think it's time that there is a holistic approach from the government level to the organisational level to association or union levels down to and including people. If we can get that downward pressure and the upward pressure at the same time, I believe we can meet and we can meet in the middle by, as John Avery would say, touching the flame and understanding the importance of holistically how we approach the whole issue of mental health care.
Totally agree. Rosemary, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm cracking. I'm chomping at the bit to speak on this one. Yeah. So for me, good is about reframing everybody. It is about reframing ourselves and reframing our organisations and reframing our government. I think we constantly talk about it's okay to have an injury, and it's okay to have an illness such as, just as a curious one, asthma. If somebody has asthma, they can go about their day-to-day life and fulfil all the requirements of their daily living. They can do that. They have an illness, but they can actually do stuff. And I think that the one thing that I would love to see in 5 years is that, we've been talking about stigma for, I don't know, centuries, just saying, in terms of mental health. But if we recognise that an illness somebody can be a whole person, even though they have an illness, I think that's what the real key for me is about busting the language that we use and making sure that in 5 years from now, just because you got a label doesn't mean to say that you're going to keep that label forever. And I think for me that's where I want to be, and it will come through a whole suite of different processes. It's about education, it's about legislation, it's about moving, governments, what governments do. It's about recognising that nobody is special and unique and can do this by themselves. It's going to take a collective of our society, not just of government, not just of individuals. It's a societal collection. I recently had a friend who had a parent that became acutely unwell with a mental illness, and the fear of the family to push their parent into good quality care was there because of their own internal stigma, and they was, oh, what's going to happen? Well, the reality is, what's going to happen if you don't get help? And we've got to get away from people being frightened to seek help. And I think that that's about language, because just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean it's permanent.
Yes.
So true. And it's about us confronting, right? Confronting that this is a temporary thing that is a natural and real thing that has come from a real place. So we shouldn't be masking or, pushing to the side, because it is what it is. And I love that you're both talking very much about that holistic view and that preventative. So we're not waiting for everyone to fall in a heap. We're seeing this as a priority consistently. And you're right when you say it has to come at all levels. And the power of language, as you've both said, is incredible, because small tweaks in language, but most importantly, awareness of your own language completely shifts. Something you've both alluded to, which has come through so loudly, I have to say, over the last week, is this fear of, so you said we have to be able to talk about it, Rosemary, this fear that if I voice up, if I say I'm not coping, if I ask for help, or I acknowledge I have a current mental health challenge, I could be walking away from my career, or I could be losing my identity within my entire career plan or perspective. And that's come through from all different places. So it's a very real feeling out there. Whether it's real or perceived is irrelevant. What's your take on that, Rosemary?
Look, it's very real. It is very, very real. I think that the fear of people, I've got colleagues, I've had private care provided rather than put it through the organisation, because what's the implications for a leader who's coordinating a response to an emergency? Oh, they've had a mental health issue, gosh. And once again, it's language and stigma, and I think it's real, because, and I think where we have to get to is, is like I said, is coming back to that's changed the perception of our leaders to go, it doesn't matter if this is an acute incident or if it's a cumulative event, people can still function. People can still function if they're supported the right way. And I think it's about if they're supported. So rather than take the all in bang, oh, you've got that, you've got to get off the books. What is it that you need? Listen, what do you need to be able to get you down this path? Sometimes the thing that people need is to be dragged kicking and screaming for assistance. Maybe. But, other times it's about going, well, actually, just walk with me. Listen to this. I will be with you as you go through this journey, even if it's only for the beginning. And I don't know how many people I've taken for that first step. And I was taken on that first step also. And I think that that's a really critical lesson to learn, is that sometimes taking that first step is the hardest one, and but it's the one that changes your life, providing it's done compassionately.
Absolutely. And it is that, as you say, it's the action too. So it's not allowing it to continue, but it's taking the action to change that, so that when things are happening, it is seen that is not the reality. Yeah. Can you mention holistic response to what's happening? For us to see success, it would be a more holistic response. Something that we've heard through from a number of different areas and with speakers as well as attendees is there's a medical model that's in place for many of the agencies, a traditional medical approach, which is great, and we respect that. But there are a lot of other alternatives, and there's a very holistic opportunity to respond to all sorts of mental health challenges now. How do we shift beyond just looking at one traditional medical model of solution?
It would be so easy to simply say, let's sit down and talk. let's do the very thing that you've done this week. If in terms of the nation's response to COVID, not only here, but indeed internationally to varying degrees, but here in Australia, there has been the national cabinet approach. Let's talk about these things in terms of the nation's wellbeing and health. This is not a hard thing to do, yet it seems when we come to discussing or talking about mental illness, that there's almost a fear. Perhaps not the right word, perhaps an unusual word in these circumstances, but nothing in life, particularly in terms of mental ill health, is to be feared. It's simply to be understood. If we're going to address the whole issue of COVID long term, it was about understanding what was required from the point of view of the vaccine. And we know that there are several variants of the vaccine now. But it was about having that holistic discussion that the country, probably for the first time, was in a notional way borderless. And we had that borderless discussion about what was so important for the nation's health and well-being. I truly believe we can have that same discussion. And so we see pockets of discussion going on at state and territory level. We see it operating across great organisations that are doing isolated pockets of work, all competing for government / taxpayer dollars. And what is simply required, I believe, in the same way we've been able to address a whole range of issues, whether it's aged care, whether it's mental health. We've seen the report released last week in Victoria in terms of, and early this week, on how to approach the mental health care of people holistically within Victoria. So it is, I think, that we can do this. We can do it. We've done it before. Yet we need to have that first discussion. And rather than trying to do this in a isolated pockets, whether it's at government level, organisational level, whether it's through industrial unions and a whole variety of other well-meaning organisations, let us all come together. It can be done. It needs to be done. And it needs to be done not only for the health, the mental health and well-being of this country, but indeed in terms of whether individuals are first responders or working in the public sector or the private sector. It's a conversation we need to have. We've done it before when it comes to aspects of physical health. The discussion and the dialogue, if you go back, I remember as a young boy seeing people who were afflicted by that terrible illness of polio. Through an international dialogue came a whole range of approaches to medication and to treatment options. It can be done. Yet when it seems to come to mental health, we seem to want to operate in silos. It's time to break the silos down. Break down the silos, because the beneficiaries of all of this have to be individuals, have to be families, have to be organisations, and ultimately it has to be this country. We all benefit from that.
Absolutely. So a question would be, if you were looking at yourself, you were speaking to yourself in your former role potentially, Ken, so that speaking to yourself as a director or a former commissioner from the point of you, when you're in that first part of the organisation, what would you say? What would you ask to change or improve? So what would you action?
Well, where do you begin? I think in perhaps an order of priority, I believe it begins at the point of recruitment. It begins at the point of where all police officers or ambulance officers or fire and rescue personnel begin their careers in their respective academies. It is about mental health care and well-being as much as it is about physical preparation and preparation for law, practice, operational procedures. Let's talk about it. in police academies and fire brigade academies. Let's talk about it in the workplace, not in meal rooms, not spasmodically because here's the latest lecture on mental health care, read it, note it and file it, but let's action it. Let's empower supervisors and managers and commanders to be able to talk to their people and being able to respond. I saw officers at various levels in the organisation respond in such a great way to their colleagues who were physically ill with a range of illnesses. Yet when it came to mental health care, they didn't know how to do it. It wasn't a lack of willingness or a lack of preparedness to do it. It was just, we're not too sure where to start. How do we begin the conversation? And I think that's all about learning at the base level of the organisation, reinforcing it through constant training and having that awareness. Also acknowledging at the same time, and I hope that through this week, there have been chief executives and there have been commissioners or general managers, as the case may happen to be. I hope there have been politicians watching your seminar this week, Kathryn, in the sense that by that holistic dialogue and ongoing conversation, we can address this problem. We can address it, and we need to address it.
Well said, absolutely well said. Rosemary, I'm going to throw to you with exactly the same question. So what would you ask to change or improve if you were sitting back in that seat?
Yeah, so I think it's going to come down to 3 simple words: expressed, modelled, reinforced. And I think as a leader, what we have to do is we have to talk about the problem. We have to talk about the implications on self and others. We have to model that behaviour. We have to model the way in which we can best serve our intent. So when you say something, you've got to mean what you say. You've got to say what you mean. You've got to mean what you say, and don't be mean when you say it, sort of thing. You know, let's actually express that, model that by showing that our those people who are in management positions below us understand that my expectation, your expectation, whatever, it is about showing care and concern and compassion, and reinforcing that this is about really important work. It sounds simple. The psychology behind expressed, modelled and reinforced is actually quite complex, but it's about getting everybody on the same page. And potentially that's about, if I was going to be doing anything, I would be making sure that the education is there and the language changed, and that we were with people, not on the opposite side of the table to people. And that's expressed, modelled and reinforced from the very top of the organisation all the way to the very bottom of the organisation. And I do agree with what Ken said. You know, that's got to start at the recruit level. It's got to be written into the practices of how you recruit, but it's about making sure top down, bottom up, meet in the middle, we're a team to actually address the issues.
Totally agree. And I think from what both of you have said, something to possibly acknowledge and put out there is there will be some middle and senior leaders and commissioners and executives out there in various roles that will feel very uncomfortable making this change. So what would you be saying to them as to the value of doing this?
Well, if you want to talk about economic value, if that's the only thing that people understand, what is the implication of staff loss because they're off sick, lost time in sick leave? What are the implications for workers' compensation? What are the implications for all of these sorts of things? There's actually a financial benefit. You can measure everything. And so if the only thing that you can, what we've got to do is work from the frame of reference from the people who are having to make the change, and make sure that they understand that frame of reference to move them to action. It's about lighting that flame underneath so they can feel touched by it, Ken.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm reminded, Kathryn, of the late Dr. Paul Drucker. Paul Drucker was a former Los Angeles police officer who went on to become a practicing psychiatrist in the United States, and he passed away last year. And Drucker, even when he was in the LAPD, talked about followership, and he talked about followership in the context of leadership. And he often said, you can be a leader who simply provides orders and instructions and directions. You will and you won't, and you must and you shouldn't. They're very easy things to do, to provide directions. I'm the chief executive, I'm the commissioner, you will. But Drucker talked about, in that context of true leadership, of followership. And followership comes back to the very first thing, one of the first things that Rosemary mentioned, and you mentioned, Kathryn, courage. Leaders must have courage. It can't always be about the bottom line, because if you're going to measure the bottom financial line, that's not a true measure of the health and well-being of your organisation. It's an indicator, but it's not a true measure about the people in your organisation. So if you want to be a true and effective leader, it is about having that and promoting followership, where people will, as that other adage goes, what gets measured gets done. And if, as a chief executive, as a middle manager, or as a commander of a small group of people, if you are showing an active interest in the health and the physical well-being and the mental well-being of your people, it will get done. People will come forward. If they feel that they can follow you, if they feel that you're providing that important leadership that is so important in a contemporary organisation today, always has been. And if you look at whether it's the military or the emergency services, followership and leadership go hand in hand, and that requires courage. Not only the courage to face a particular incident or operation, the fire, the bushfire, how to respond to a particular and horrific motor vehicle accident, rushing forward. I've heard people use the expression of the emergency service workers in this country that as other people run away from the incident, the emergency service workers run toward it. That takes courage. So it is about that courage, but leadership is that other important aspect of courage, that if you are actively interested in your people, they will follow you and they will talk about those important issues, including their own mental health care and well-being.
So well said. Thank you.
And I think quickly, Kathryn, if I just quickly say, leadership is about taking people somewhere they perhaps don't want to go without them realising it. And so the concept of first following, it's not always the person at the top that's the first one to change the course of our journey, but somebody below who takes a step to the left, and all of a sudden we have a first follower is really the leader.
Yes.
Totally agree. And that personal leadership is really what we're calling out to in people through this summit. And I think your words, both of you, have just been so powerful and so articulate in sharing tangible, credible solutions and strategies of how we can really make that change. And I think the important thing is, often when you call out the stigma and you talk about mental health, people see it as this mountain that we can't move and we can't change. But what you've shared today beautifully is that we can, and there's very, very tangible ways. So certainly through our reflections of the summit and bringing the feedback and the themes and the conversations from a range of people, we've noticed that those immediate actions that organizations, leaders, individuals can take is just encouraging that conversation, whether it's at home with your family or whether it's in your organization and you want to call something out. Start encouraging those conversations at all levels.
Yes.
Make sure there's access. So make sure that if you have resources and you have tools and you have support systems, that people actually know, because it sounds from the feedback we've had, there's a lot of great resources and tools, but people don't necessarily know they're there. And that's from a family, a volunteer and a paid uniformed perspective. So let's make sure there's access. Let's make sure there's communication from all different agencies there. Let's also look at that preventative model. Let's consider what preventative response can look like rather than waiting for that end stage. And something we've sort of noticed is that accepting that this is a normal response to abnormal situations. So stop seeing yourself as the problem if you're at that individual level and say, This is a human response to a very abnormal situation that is part of my daily job. And so that awareness of the language, so we talk a lot about PTSD. We're quite passionate about changing that from disorder to injury. It's an injury that you can recover, you can work forward from. It's something that we can look to. And a phrase that I loved from an earlier session was, let's look at post-traumatic growth. Let's look at that strength that you can regain and work from when you move forward. So on that note, Wellbeing Australia does have a program that we've run before and had great feedback about, that's PTSD Resurrected Regroup. I think we only have 3 or 4 seats left in that for the March program. So we will continue to be sharing and offering these sorts of things. So they're all immediate actions that we encourage and offer to everyone. From a longer term, organisationally, but also personally, we really encourage people to look at that, the support and the resources, and let's look across agencies, let's look across states, let's come together to share what's working. Let's not try and reinvent, let's look at what's working and let's share so that we're creating that better solution. And let's look holistically at bringing in that breadth of framework. So we had a lot of people speaking about different things that worked that weren't necessarily one model. It was a combination brought together. Just as you guys have shared, we need to look at that leadership. We need to look at the environment that we're in, and we need to start questioning and challenging toxic or bullying behaviours that are harmful. And we need to start to get that change process through, as you said, from a recruitment level right through. So we need to keep that moving. Individually, a lot of people really responded to our spirituality and faith session in that deeper understanding of their values, their morals, of what was driving them and how that was really impacting and influencing their identity and their connection with where they were going. And on a final note of that piece of potential burnout and disconnection. So whether it's disconnection from your work, your family, your volunteering, whatever it is, let's start to look for those warning signs and let's try and catch them sooner. And that's from who you're watching as well as within yourself. So in closing, I really want to thank you both for your contribution tonight, which has been incredible, and the fantastic feedbacks in the chat as well. Thanking you both for your words of wisdom, your courage, your encouragement of us being able to change this process forward. Rosemary, I'd love for you to also pass on our thanks to Shane for kindly taking on the role of ambassador and for sharing the message and the vision that is very aligned to his in terms of us breaking down these stigmas and moving forward. As we mentioned at the beginning, there will continue to be access to all these recordings. So our view is this will be accessible ongoing. So you just need to come to Wellbeing Australia's website to be able to access them. There are a number of very kind speakers who have offered their books and resources for free. That will all be on the website under their session. So if you were interested in any of those, we have them there, and that's an advocation for their passion for creating this change. And there's some fantastic resources there. So we encourage you to sort of take a glance, even if you're not convinced. It's free, so take that opportunity from there. From a Wellbeing Australia point of view, moving forward to continue supporting, we're going to collate the feedback that we have received. We will be coming back to the agencies that we've been working with, and we will look to continue. The feedback we've had is, please, can you continue this conversation in the short and the longer term? So we'll be coming back over the next short while with ideas there. We do have our Veterans Wellbeing Summit coming up. So our Veterans Wellbeing Summit is free, as is the PTSD Resurrected for first responders as well as veterans. Please take note of sharing your thoughts in that feedback in the survey after this session. As we mentioned, that's the goal where we can come back and talk. So it is absolutely critical that we get your feedback. You can give feedback anonymously. You do not have to put your name and contact details in it, but it is what informs us to move forward. So we have run out of time, unfortunately. I think we could have kept talking for another few hours. You guys have been amazing, but really hope to have further conversations with you to help people as they move forward on these actions.
Great. I look forward.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thanks.